let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes in
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Administrator Office Hours live stream here on Red Hat Live Streaming. I am Andrew Sullivan, co-host with Mr. Jonny Rickard. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm hanging in there as much as I can. Trying to.
We're in the dog days of summer, as they say. We let's see, here in North Carolina, we had the first hurricane come through in like 2 weeks, or 2 years rather. It's been a while. So I say hurricane came through. It was they canceled school, right, last Thursday when it came through, I guess in anticipation of winds and flooding and all that other stuff. And I don't, it felt very preemptive. Like it felt very, I don't know. I was making plans to take my kids to school, right, in the rain and all that other stuff. No, I got out of bed at 6 a.m. and it was literally sunny out.
Oh wow!
everything had passed through during the night, so yeah, it was. It came out well. I can't complain.
That's
Everything went
awesome.
well. Better than expected. Better than expected. But how's things? How's things out there? How's Texas?
It's good, man. It's finally starting to cool off. I think we're coming up on our last 100-degree day, which would be nice.
Yeah.
My with cooler weather means that the feral hogs are coming back. So if you know my history with the feral hogs, they destroy my front yard a couple times a year, and they've already started. So
Are these literal hogs or just some, like the landscaper people that come out? You got the HOA people who come out,
No, I wish. No, these are they're actual feral pigs.
It's the javelinas.
I don't know if they're javelinas. It might be. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up. But yeah, they're massive, and for since we've lived here, in the fall and spring, they come into my front yard and they like WWE in my front yard. So I ended up having to resod or reseed, at least once a year just because of them. So
no, I say that a friend of mine lives in a townhouse and they have a homeowners association who takes care of all the landscaping, and I was chatting with them the other day and like, I don't know, my whole yard is destroyed right now. I'm like, what happened? It looks like a bunch of animals came through. No, it was the landscaping company who was replacing a bunch of stuff and all that. I mean, okay.
Gutted everything. Wow,
Yeah.
That sucks.
Anyways, well, happy Wednesday to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So this is one of the Office Hours series of live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming. So that means that we are here to answer any and all questions that you happen to have about, OpenShift. Jonny and I both work in the OpenShift side of the house here at Red Hat. So I'm in the product BU. And Jonny is over on the engineering side, working with the validated platforms team. So we will do our best to answer any of those questions that you have. Feel free to ask them in chat. And if we don't know the answer, we also have the ability to reach into wherever we need to, whether it's product management or engineering or where else we happen to need to. So don't hesitate to ask those questions. I mean, I guess you can answer your own question too. That being said, we do have I'm going to call it a pseudo topic for today, Jonny.
Yeah.
So the creative title we use today, OpenShift knicknacks, because this is kind of a mishmash of different things. It's been a while since we kind of sat down and had a technical digging into various aspects and various things that are going on in OpenShift. It's been a long while since we talked about what was going on with OpenShift 4.13, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing in my opinion. I mean, it's good and bad, right? It's bad because, OpenShift 4.13, of course, is the new shininess, and we want to talk about it. Even though at this point we're getting awful close to 4.14. But it's taken us this long because we've had such a backlog of guests, people who have come on the stream to talk about anything and everything. And it's funny. I think I realized I was looking, where's our notes document here, Jonny? I was looking at, as I was going through this yesterday, the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the next 8 streams, only one of them we don't have a topic.
Yeah.
And I expect that topic is going to get filled in. Because it's just, we're scheduling out in November. Like, that's just crazy to me.
Such a great feeling.
So it is, right? And it's all here, look. So next week is Ansible, Dev Workspaces, and more. The week after that is our open week. I'm hoping we can squeeze something in there. Who was it that reached out to us? The SED team, but I think they want to do November.
Yeah.
After that is Ortwin with Service Mesh, and then October in the build up to KubeCon is going to be DevSecOps. So we've got 4 separate streams that talk about all different aspects: vulnerability management, configuration management, runtime security, CI/CD pipeline security, just all different aspects of DevSecOps, and how we as administrators and OpenShift as a platform can really enhance all of that. So I'm kind of excited about that one. That one, it's taken us quite a bit of back and forth to coordinate across all of the different folks. Great job on that, by the way, Jonny. But it's going to be it's going to be interesting.
It is. I think it's such a good topic, and like if you rewind back to January or even probably December of last year, right, coming into this year, we're talking about like what's the big thing, what do we think the focus is going to be for this year? It's always it was security, right? Like we were both talking about it, the way that Summit was positioned and the way that our products have been positioning themselves lately, like it just makes sense. So it's good to close out the year, or at least get close to the close of the year, and talk about security, just kind of wrap it all up.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was talking with my manager, and he laid out, here's the 4 priorities that I want to have for the remainder of the year, and it's things like AI and Edge and all that other stuff. And I pointed out, well, security isn't one of those, and his response was, security is a part of everything. Like, it's never not a priority, so I don't need to call out that it's specifically a priority. I'm like, that's fair, I mean. We talk about all the different areas, places, integrations. I mean, every aspect, every component of OpenShift has some security component to it. So, and within the product business unit, the security team is one of the biggest as well, with all the product managers and other folks that are there.
Oh, that's awesome. It's cool that shift in mindset has kind of now we're seeing it happen, right? Where we were talking about baking it in, but now it's like, well, yeah, dude, it's obvious. It's everywhere. Like, yeah. There's no skipping that. We don't even need to talk about it because it's going to be there.
Yeah, and I'm looking for. So I see your question there, Omar. I somewhere around in all of my mini multitude of bookmarks, I have one for a security thing that I just got to find, and talking and reading and at the same time. Here we go. Doesn't always work well for me.
I was going to challenge you to start typing something.
No,
while doing all of those at the same time.
That would go bad. Yeah. So yeah, Waleed's pointed you to the correct place there, the security guide ebook. I'm seeing if I can find the direct link to it. Yeah, here we go. Although I think there might be something that's a little more updated than that. We'll have to dig that up. Maybe we can share that at the next top of mind. So with that in mind, Jonny, we got a couple of top of mind things. So top of mind topics for anyone who is new or unfamiliar with the stream are things that have come up recently in Jonny and I's sort of day-to-day interactions that we feel like might be important to bring up. So we had a couple of things. I already talked about the upcoming schedule. You dropped in here some API deprecations, Jonny?
Yeah. So in OpenShift 4.14, which I don't even know, right? I think it's a couple months from now. I think it might be October, November is when we're expecting it to release, but it could roll. The storage API is going from V1 beta 1 to V1. So it's something to keep in mind when you're talking about, or when you're thinking about upgrading to 4.14. Now, because this is a breaking change or a potential breaking change, you do have to approve the upgrade. So if you want to do the upgrade, you're going to have to go in and approve it. And if you look in this article right here, I'm about to paste to you. If you follow this Red Hat article, it gives you the patch command that you can run that will automatically approve the upgrade. So that way you can do an upgrade in place. And then that was it though. I was actually kind of surprised. Like I went back and looked, like in that article, it gives you the deprecations that are coming out and then the way to approve it when you're ready. And I looked up what V1 Beta 1 was going to go to, and I just saw that it's just going to go to V1. So not a huge deal, but it's a big deal if you've got automation in place. So you'll want to update all that before you make your upgrades.
Yeah, I think that approval process is fairly normal for anytime there's API removals and deprecations. We've been enforcing that or making sure that happens. So, trying to keep folks aware and, that type of stuff. Because especially, what was the first one? Was it 4.9? Was the first
9,
time we
yeah.
had a whole bunch of, like, a significant number of APIs removed. And it's kind of continued throughout. So I'm happy to see that that's happening.
Yeah, me too.
Let's see. What was the other one that we had? This one was one that I put in. So I discovered this. I was chatting with someone the other day. I'm going to share my window. So I was chatting with someone the other day, and they were talking about how their node, their cluster, was selecting the wrong interface to use for the SDN. So what does that mean? Let's see here. Let's go to docs.openshift.com. So let's go to the OpenShift 4.13 documentation and come down to installing on any platform. So this machine network.cider value, where is it? Where's the sample install config? Here we go. So inside of here, we have this. Well, it's not here. Of course not. There should be a machine network.cider stanza here. And it looks just like this one. So the machine network.cider is the network cider, right? So /24 / whatever that you expect the hosts to have an interface on. And it is expected to be the quote unquote primary interface. So when the hosts come up, when they come online, they will look for an interface that is on that subnet, and then they will use that in order to instantiate the SDN and do various other things inside of there. And you can set that particular value. And I really wish I understood why this wasn't in here. We've seemed to have rearranged these things. Nope. Carrier, OpenStack, whatever. I'm not going to dwell on it. Anyways, so you can set multiple values there. It's just an array in YAML. So if you have some nodes that are on one subnet and some nodes that are on a different subnet, all is fine and well and all that. Where it gets confused is if you have more than one interface or more than one subnet defined there, and the nodes have more than one interface with on those, right? So in this example, I've got 10.0.0.0/24 and 192.0.0.0.2/24. So if the hosts have an interface on each of these subnets, what it'll do is it'll take whichever one comes up first. So if there's no routing between these two, I really want it to use this one, but it came up on this one and I can't route between them. So that node just never correctly joins the SDN, right? Things don't work. So what you can do is configure an IP hint by setting a machine config for those nodes. And basically, the documentation walks through this process. I'll plug in a link there. So essentially what that does, and here's our machine config, is it tells it, hey, use this interface as the one for the SDN. Even though you have more than one, IP address, more than one network adapter on a machine network, use this one as your preference. And you can set this on a per node basis as well. So maybe I've got, some network config where I have my nodes, my servers configured across 4 different subnets, and servers in 1 and 2 have 2 of those interfaces, and 3 and 4. Anyways, this gives you granular control over how you want each one of those to be, which network interface you want each one of those to use for the SDN. So I thought this was helpful. It's not new in 4.13, but it is new in 4.12. And I did not know about this until one of the engineering folks told me about it. So there we
That's
go.
awesome. Yeah, that's cool. That's like the old route and rule thing, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day. Yeah.
Anyways, I felt like that was a rambling explanation, but
It was good. It was good.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's stop sharing that. All right. So I think that was all of the top of mind topics we had. We talked about the agenda, which is something we like to talk about. So again, next week I think is going to be an interesting one. With Ansible and dev spaces. That's going to be really cool, especially dev spaces as an IDE for creating Ansible scripts. That's I don't know. Is that a thing? Are we going to show that? Because that's really awesome.
I told him I'd be ready.
Yeah.
Don't show up without a demo. Be ready. I pulled a Coach Prime on him. I was like, "We coming."
I mean, you think about it, right? With Ansible application platform in OpenShift, basically one OpenShift, AAP on OpenShift becomes your one-stop shop for everything from, literally writing playbooks to, running them to managing them, right? All that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it'll be neat to have them on. I need to reach back out to Roger and talk to him and see if we can't get him back on, because I know we worked with him for a long time trying to get the schedules right and stuff, and it just didn't work out. So
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have somebody from the practice come on and deep dive on some of the stuff that they're doing too.
Yep. Yes, Waleed, both Ansible and dev spaces. So using dev spaces to create and manage Ansible playbooks, which is cool. So today we have I'm going to say a pseudo agenda. I know there's a couple of things you wanted to talk about, Jonny, multi-arch and hosted control planes, right? I wanted to go through and talk about just a couple of highlights from 4.13 that I don't know that we have had proper time to revisit since the 4.13 announcement and all of that. Let's see. Please discuss compliance operator and ACS for Kubernetes compliance. Is it overlapping? So we'll talk about all of that in just a second. Again, don't hesitate to submit any questions that you have, and we'll address those that come up. And I apologize for butchering any and everyone's names. My children can attest that I'm terrible with names. So compliance operator is sort of, as the name implies, it is run. So it's run in individual OpenShift clusters. Right. So I can go in and I can say, I want this cluster to be, PCI compliant. I want it to be HIPAA compliant. I can, whatever standard I want it to adhere to. And it goes in and it basically checks for that compliance and can optionally remediate that against whatever the standard happens to be. So it sets a number of different things inside of there. John, do you happen to remember which stream we did where we had Kirsten and I know Mike Foster's been on as well?
I'll find him. I don't remember off the top of my head though.
So it applies or checks for and optionally applies compliance standards against the cluster. So ACS does a whole bevy of other things in addition to that. So ACS doesn't necessarily apply and enforce compliance, but it can tell you if you are out of compliance. But it can also do things like runtime security. So for example, you can set rules in ACS that say if if a pod is running this binary, the johnnyvirus.exe. Exe is a bad extension because it's going to be, I guess it'll work with Windows nodes. But anyways, johnnyvirus.sh. If this gets executed, don't allow, or tries to get started, don't allow it. Stop that from happening. It also has, kind of a running audit log of all of the things that are going on inside of the cluster, including things like pod-to-pod communication. Hey, this pod and this pod are talking to each other. And as an administrator, I can go in and do things like, oh, hey, create a network policy rule that allows that communication only on these specific ports, right? That type of stuff. So they are meant to work in conjunction with each other, as well as with ACM for multi-cluster side of things. So remember, compliance operator is deployed and implemented at the single cluster level. You would want to use something like ACM to deploy and manage that across a bunch of different clusters. So I've got these 6 clusters that all have one compliance standard, and these 3 clusters that have a different compliance standard, and this other one that has no compliance, right? I don't need to use it. And then I can use ACS against all of those to check for various things. Hopefully that helps explain some of it, and we'll dig up that episode because I know Kirsten did a good job walking through all that as well.
Yep.
Early stage software developer, Anushman, trying to learn more about open source and making meaningful contributions. Great help if you could suggest any Slack or Discord community to join. So I always, by default, recommend the Kubernetes Slack. So it's just kubernetes.slack.com. We've got a thing for that, don't we, Jonny?
Yep.
Let's see. There we go. So the OpenShift users channel is specific to OpenShift, of course, and OKD as well. But Kubernetes is always, there's tons and tons and tons of different projects that are in there, all kinds of other stuff. I also typically recommend to folks, if you are specifically interested in OpenShift, the OpenShift Commons has a Slack team as well. That's a good one to go and find community. But I will admit, I am not an engineer. I'm not a developer, so I don't know where a lot of the community building happens. I would suspect, or I would suggest, probably going to, finding a project that you like and, checking on GitHub, looking at the contributors guide and looking for the other, like, how do I request help type of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's usually the best way that I've found to begin getting familiar and participating in what's happening there. Any thoughts, Jonny?
No, I think that's perfect, right? I mean, it's because chat it's going to get lost in chat anyways, right? Like you're going to ask probably some benign, I don't mean to sound like nasty or anything, but like you're going to ask something that may not be specific to a problem, right? You're just going to be like, hey, how do I do this? And you might get lost in the shuffle where if you go to the project, you look at the contributors guide and stuff like that. That'll tell you if they have one, like, hey, how do I give something back? And I can tell you most projects are looking for like documentation review, making sure that the docs are right. If you've got some code that you can push in, just be ready to be told no, right? Because I'd say a lot of like the big projects are not going to accept your PR without a good description and a good write up and stuff like that. So
yeah, Peter, their doc changes and updates are a good way to get involved in a project. Absolutely. They're always looking for help with docs and helping to explain use cases better, helping to explain value prop better. All of that type of stuff is always, in my experience, welcomed by projects. If you find bugs, if you create a PR for a bug that you found, I'm sure that that's great as well if that's your forte. But if you're just dipping your toes in the water, you don't have to be a software developer, like a hardcore like engineer down at the lowest levels in order to contribute to those projects. Everyone is welcome from all skill levels and all backgrounds. Yep. All right, Jonny, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
If you can go first, it does. I mean, I can go if you want, but I'm just trying to dig up those episodes. So
okay, yeah, I'm just going to walk through a couple of things from the docs. I do have a cluster so that we can look at some things if we want to, but there was some things that again I wanted to highlight, just kind of as important and exciting things. Well, exciting is relative, but important things that I think we should be aware of. Let's share this again. There we go. So as with any and every release, I always strongly encourage everyone to go and check out the release notes because that's going to be probably the most thorough way that you can see everything that has happened or changed in a particular release. So here on the live stream, we stream the product management team doing the What's New release. However, keep in mind that that's going to be an abbreviated list, right? We only have so much time. I think they usually shoot for 60 or 90 minutes on those. They're focusing on things that are going to have the most awareness or that they feel like the most number of people are going to care about as opposed to, low level things. And as you scroll through the release notes, if you've never looked through here, you can see it's broken up into different sections. So here I've got new features and enhancements. So, for example, a big one is we've now moved to RHEL 9.2. So OpenShift 4.12 is RHEL 8 based. OpenShift 4.13 and later are now RHEL 9 based. So if you have hardware dependencies or something like that, keep that in mind. But as we scroll down through here, you can see deprecated and removed features. I always suggest if you look at no other section inside of here, always look at this one, because this will tell you what's happening within what to expect to change within both this as well as future releases. So for example, vSphere 7.0 update 1 and earlier is no longer supported as an installation platform. So if you aren't on at least vSphere 7.0 update 2, you're no longer supported with OpenShift 4.13 and later. So same thing with ESXi, right? I don't know why we separate out those two because they're the same thing, but whatever. So keep that in mind. It's largely driven by CSI. So now all new 4.13 clusters use the vSphere CSI driver by default. The in-tree driver is still present. In 4.14, auto migration will be enabled. So everybody moves their volumes from in-tree over to CSI in 4.14. Let's see, what other stuff is in here? Yeah, special resource operator. Nobody should have been using that. But anyways, there's tons and tons and tons of stuff that's in here. I like that they've now broken this up into different sections. That's very helpful. So image content source policy objects you see are now deprecated. So that has been updated, or that has been changed, where it's no longer just the generic image content source policy. There is targeted ones for by hash or by tag. So that's an important one to keep an eye on as well. I set my desktop here to be on do not disturb, but I did not set my phone, and so my phone is now being distracting.
Blowing it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna flip that over. Let's see, just lots of stuff in here. I'm not going to go through these one by one. Here's that ICSP stuff. So you can see converting an image content source policy for repository mirroring. Wow, that was a butchering of a word.
Take that.
Yeah, So one thing I also noticed, it's been slowly creeping up. So literally years ago, I wrote a series of blog posts that was like day 2 things for your OpenShift cluster. I think it was 5 blog posts in all. And we took that and we turned it into the first like 4 or 5 sections of this segment of the documentation. And I think it was like, it was cluster tasks, node tasks, like preparing for users. You can see that now this section is just massive. There's like
it's crazy.
24 different things in here. Regions and zones for vSphere clusters, which is another thing that is now GA with 4.13. vSphere has zone awareness, which I think is really cool. So you use labels inside of vCenter to identify the zones that your hypervisor hosts live in. And then you identify those zones in vSphere. Is it going to show me how to do it in here? It doesn't look like it. Anyways, I have another link for it up somewhere that shows us exactly how to do it. I thought I had one up. Oh, whatever. Man, I'm not doing good with my docs references today. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been online.
Is that what it is?
We just came off a 3-day weekend. I'm just gonna help with excuses because I feel it too.
So yep. Let's see. CNCF release team also do ask for shadows for different activities. Yep. Yeah, I know. And for anybody who remembers Christian Hernandez when he was doing GitOps Guide to the Galaxy, Christian was a CNCF ambassador. I think he still is, but he got started by doing docs reviews and stuff like that. So it's a great way to get involved. Just continuing that line of thought here a couple minutes later. Anyways, sorry for the digression.
Oh.
So a couple of things that I want to pull out and highlight here. So one, and I'm sure it's in the docs, but I'm not going to dig through the docs and find it. So we now have added support for single node OpenShift on AWS. So historically, single node OpenShift has only been supported with a non-integrated cluster deployment. So basically a platform none. If we come down, installing, if we go to this again, installing on any platform, basically what I would do is set that install config. What I would do, and we can see here, 0 replicas for the worker nodes and 1 replica for the control plane node.
Yep.
And that would trigger the deployment of a single node OpenShift. So historically, that was always supported with platform none. So now we have added support for AWS as well. So just keep in mind the limitations of single node OpenShift. Right? Clearly, it's a single node control plane, which means that even though you can add worker nodes, compute nodes after the deployment, it is still a single control plane node, which means if that single control plane node goes down or self-destructs or whatever, your cluster is lost. So keep that in mind. You cannot convert from a single node OpenShift into a 3 control plane node OpenShift, whether it's 3 node compact cluster or a traditional 5+ node cluster. So if you deploy single node, you always have single node. The other thing to note, and Peter, if you're listening in still, you can correct me in chat. When you deploy single node OpenShift, it marks the cluster as non-highly available. If you intend to add compute nodes, it doesn't change that field. Why is this important, and why did I call out Peter? So Peter is one of the PMs for OpenShift virtualization. When that flag is set, it disables live migration for OpenShift virtualization. So if you deploy single node OpenShift to a single physical node, and then you go and you add additional compute nodes with the intention of using, virtualization, deploying VMs, home lab, something like that, you will not be able to use live migration for those VMs. So you would want to do a compact cluster, a 3 node cluster from day one in order to have that available. Is there any way to install OpenShift in VMware Workstation for lab practice? Absolutely. So all you would do is follow this installing a cluster on any platform method. So there is no cloud provider integration for VMware Workstation, but instead you would just follow this. You can also do, I think OpenShift Local works with VMware Workstation, if I remember correctly. So you can use OpenShift Local for that as well. So yeah, Waleed. So a compact or a 3 node cluster is exactly as the name implies. It is a OpenShift cluster of only 3 nodes where all 3 nodes are control plane and compute combined nodes. So you can, in that instance, after deployment or at some time in the future, whenever you want to, you can go in and add additional compute nodes, and you can even go in and you can change it so that the control plane is no longer schedulable and it turns into a regular quote unquote cluster. In the same way, you can take any cluster that you've deployed in the traditional way. So, 3 control plane nodes, 2+ compute nodes, and you can mark the control plane schedulable at any point if you so choose. But yeah, the big change there, Waleed, is adding support for additional platforms. So historically, I think it was only supported on VMware, AWS, and non-integrated. So adding Azure and GCP is a significant change there. Yeah, that's a good point, Waleed. Yep, depends on which lab. So dev spaces and sandboxes, cool stuff. So we should definitely talk about that next week, Jonny.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and one thing back on the single node, like it's worked for a long time. I've been using a single node in AWS, but like it's just the official support aspect of this. So it comes down to like the yeah, you can, but should you conversation?
Yeah.
Like if you're looking for support and you need something like that, then well, now you've got it, but before you didn't.
Yep. I forgot to grab water, and now I'm on the verge of a coughing fit. Is it okay to schedule infra resources to control plane nodes? So I would say that that's probably a matter of opinion. So Andrew's opinion is yes, so long as your control plane nodes are appropriately sized. So what that means is, generally speaking, the control plane workload, so think etcd, API server, etc., will reserve enough or put in a request on the pod, enough resources to maintain sort of bare minimum functionality or idle state functionality. If you have a cluster that's doing a bunch of things, right, issuing API calls, deploying workloads, just doing what Kubernetes does, it can easily exceed that reserved amount of resources or the amount that's allocated via a request. Um, so, if I deploy, say, logging's, a pretty hefty infra service, and I put it onto a control plane node that is barely large enough to be able to do all of the things that are already happening in the cluster, that's going to cause issues. So you just want to, make sure that they're appropriately sized. You can put, I know you can put resource constraints in place on the infra workloads. I think you can also modify the requests for control plane workloads, but I would have to double check that last one. So yeah, Andrew's opinion: so long as the nodes are appropriately sized, it's perfectly fine to do that. Some people will disagree and say that control plane should always be protected, should always be isolated. Some people will say just que sera, whatever
Exactly.
will be, and it'll sort itself out, right? Let's see, can we configure a load balancer for single node OpenShift, or is it not required? So it's technically not required because there's nothing to load balance. It's all one node. So you would just configure whatever that node's IP address is. You would set DNS for API, API INT, as well as star.apps, all point to the node's IP address. You don't need a load balancer in front of it.
So one caveat to that is if you, and this isn't like taken away from what Andrew just said, because what he said is 100% correct. This is more of a just, watch out for this gotcha, especially if you're not expecting it. When you deploy on Snow, say if you take a Helm chart from some upstream project, right? Most upstream projects use Ingress, or they use, they're basing their deployment off of a cloud. So their service type might be type load balancer. And if you deploy that application into your single node OpenShift and the service type is load balancer, then you're going to get this stuck in pending state. And that's because you don't have that load balancer. So if you needed one or wanted one, you could do metal LB, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Or change the service type to like a cluster IP or something else.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good point. Rapscallion, how do we know what appropriately sized means for any given workload? So it is a bit of a guess and check. So the way that I work on this, and Jonny, I'm interested in your perspective as well, because you were a consultant for a long time. Make an educated guess. So if you can, and I was digging through while Jonny was talking, I was looking here. So things like recommended practices for scaling the cluster, right? Control plane node sizing. So you can see we make some basic recommendations. So you can kind of use this to make an educated guess of what you might want to size those nodes at based on this. From there, it's almost always going to be utilize the monitoring tools that are either built into the cluster or whatever you have in your environment and make adjustments accordingly. Generally speaking, as you start to scale up, as you go from, testing into production with your workload and stuff like that, is where you identify how quickly things change and you set your alert thresholds so that you have time to react. So what does that mean? Okay, my memory utilization as I scale, my control plane memory utilization as I scale up my application goes up in increments. Those increments happen at peak times every 15 minutes. So if somebody is sitting there at their desk and they get an alert, and in less than 15 minutes, they can react and do something to alleviate that situation, then 15 minutes would be, how much early warning you need, or how much ahead of, let me think of the right way to phrase this, how much below the max threshold you would want to set that alert at. If it's off hours or, whatever, and it's going to take 6 hours because I have to send an alert, I have to wait for somebody to look at their phone, I have to wait for them to get dressed, brush their teeth, drink a cup of coffee, drive into the office, log, all of these other things, then you would just want to set that. You would want to take that into account. So monitoring is always critical in my opinion, and especially looking at the trend analysis aspect of that, looking at those bigger time frame. Hey, as we've scaled up over the last 1, 3, 6 months, here's what those resources have begun to look like. Also looking at it at a micro. Hey, within the hour we deployed 30 new pods and our resources went like this. Just keeping an eye on all those things. We move info responsibilities around, and I know I skipped over, Hasif, your question. If we move info responsibilities around, is it easy to move them back in case we find it's more demanding than we thought? Yes, absolutely. So moving them, and if I remember correctly, it's under here.
Yeah, there should be like a top level, like moving info resources or something like that.
Yeah. So for each one of the infra workloads,
workloads, yeah, not resources.
Yeah. For each one of them, there is creating infrastructure nodes. And then I believe from here, it will link me to the right. Yeah, moving resources to infrastructure machine sets. I could have eventually gotten there, but this left-hand menu here has gotten so large.
It's insane. Yeah. No, it's totally insane.
Yep. So effectively, all you're doing for each one of the infra workloads is you're going in and setting both, if needed, tolerations as well as node selectors to put them into the right place. So we come down here. Here's our example. Here's our node selector of putting it on an infra node. So if you wanted to put it onto a control plane node, right, whatever label you want to use, and then adding any tolerations that need to be on there, depending on the workload. If you want to move it to a different node type or put it back onto a standard compute node, you would just remove these selectors from each one of those workloads. That's all it is to move those. Once you change that, it'll, I think it takes 5 minutes. So like if you were to go in and change it so that, no, it should take less than that. I think the operator will automatically change it. I'm thinking it'll be 5 minutes if you change the node label to set a no execute. It takes 5 minutes for it to be booted.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's easy, and you can see down here router, registry, monitoring, logging. Like each one has this type of stuff in there. And what I'll do, I'll post this documentation into the chat here. So Hasif, how do you recommend to run all workloads, DevQA prod in a single cluster with namespace isolation? That's a big, complex question, I think. And I say that because I think each organization, arguably each project, is going to have different risk tolerance for each one of those. So how do you accommodate that? Some things are relatively straightforward, right? Quotas, setting a namespace quota so that way dev gets, a limited set of resources and can't consume the entire, cluster's worth of resources. Where it gets challenging is, and Jonny, maybe you know off the top of your head, can you set a default pod priority at the namespace level? Because what I'm thinking is, could I set prod, so any pod deployed to the prod namespace automatically gets a pod priority of high, or or something like that. I'm clearly not using a real name there. So that way, when it comes to things like preemption, when it comes to things like scheduling, that type of stuff, prod is the last ones to be selected. You can influence that through the QoS, pod QoS. So if the request and the what is the other thing? The limit. The request and the limit are set to be the same. It has a QoS policy of guaranteed, which means that it is the last of the QoS classes to be selected for eviction and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know off the top of my head if there's a way to set pod priority and stuff like that at the namespace level.
It looks like you can set a global one. But yeah, I don't see anything for the namespace, but that's just my like 1 minute try, like quick and dirty search. So it's
Okay.
probably in there. I'll keep digging around.
Yeah, I mean, there might be something in the, some kind of operator or something like that you could utilize in order to help with that. But
Mm-hmm.
looking through Peter's comment here. So have a good description about single node OpenShift versus HA control planes. Cannot convert a single node OpenShift into 3-node. Yeah. Could be done with a policy engine. Yeah, I would assume so, Waleed. Maybe a gosh, what's the thing called?
Talk about Gatekeeper?
Yeah, or where when I submit a pod, it has to pass through a request, a mutating webhook.
Oh, yeah.
You could use something like a mutating webhook implemented by an operator in order to say, oh, this is submitted, to this namespace or something like that, and have it set those priorities accordingly. But I don't know. I feel like that might be jumping 2 or 3 steps ahead when there's probably something simpler out there. And I'm always a fan of simple. So there was quickly just a couple of other things I wanted to get to. Jonny, I want to make sure you have a few minutes. So
Yeah, take your time.
configuring regions and zones in vCenter. If you are a vCenter user or a VMware, you're deploying OpenShift clusters on VMware. This could be an important one. So for a long time, people have been asking if we can help with things like anti-affinity rules and configuring those at the cluster level. This doesn't get you to anti-affinity rules for pod types, but it does help emulate something like that, where I can, say, hey, I've identified, these 3 hosts as zone A, these 3 as zone B, and these 3 as zone C. I want control plane nodes, a control plane node in each one of those. So it's not an anti-affinity, but it just helps to make sure that it lands in the right place. So pay attention to that one. Yeah. I don't remember. Oh, that was why I had that one up. I thought this was really cool and really interesting. So if you deploy bare metal, so you're deploying using physical servers, either with UPI, which is technically a non-integrated, right? It's a platform non-deployment. You can still use the bare metal operator in order to add and manage nodes in the cluster. So effectively what you're doing here, so do notice there is a limitation here, right? So the big one is there is no provisioning network. Basically, it's using the BMC or DRAC or whatever the equivalent is, right? So with Redfish and the virtual media aspect. So essentially what you do is first for the bare metal operator or the metal 3 operator, you tell it to turn on more or less, hey, deploy yourself, make yourself available. And then down here for each one of those nodes, we define a secret that contains the BMC credentials. And then we tell it where that BMC is, right? Here's the address, the IP address of the BMC and how to access it. From there, you create that bare metal host object and it provisions and you can join it to the cluster just like any other node inside of there. So to me, if this is something, if you have that ability to reach the BMCs on your hardware, this is a super easy way to add and remove nodes to your cluster. So historically, it would be something like either use assisted installer and pull an ISO and boot it to the ISO and then join it either through the console.redhat.com instance or through ACM, or boot to the ISO and point it to the install config or something like that. Not the install config, the worker ignition, and let it join from there. This just handles all of that for you. So in my opinion, this was a super nice, super convenient way of adding and managing nodes inside of here. And it includes removing nodes as well. So you can see removing hosts using the bare metal operator. So I will link to these docs. The shortened version of those docs.
Well, it's nice to see that they're making things a little bit easier.
Yeah. It feels like, not to say that there's the pace of new features is slowing down, because it's not at all. but it feels like a lot of things are getting mature, and it's, we're getting in a lot of those little usability things, which is really, really nice. So the last one I wanted to touch on here is expanding the cluster network. So the cluster network is what's used in order to determine the set of IP addresses that are assigned to pods. So when I deploy a cluster, do I still have this up over here? There should be a sample install config. Here we go. So inside of here, really, it doesn't have the networking stanza. We really need to standardize these things. All right, so installing on any platform, because I'm pretty sure I saw it over here. Sample install config. So inside of here, we have all of these different network things underneath the networking stanza. So cluster network is a set of IP addresses. You can see by default it's a /14 that are used or assigned to the hosts for the pods that they are hosting. So by default, each host will get a /23 assigned out of this /14. So this is important for a couple of different reasons. First, a /23 represents the most pods that can be deployed to that node. So in this case, that cluster couldn't have any more than 512 pods deployed to it. Not a big deal because we only support up to 500 pods on a node anyways. But there's a lot of customers who will deploy something smaller than this, right? They'll use a /24 or even a /25 because, oh, my nodes are small. I'm never going to need more nodes than that or more pods than that. But they will also allocate smaller segments of this cluster network. A /14 is a lot of IP space, right? So how do we, what's important between these two numbers? So the maximum number of nodes that you can have in a cluster is determined by how many /23s, because that's the host prefix here, will fit in a /14. So the way we calculate that is by subtracting 14 from 23, which is 9, and then we do 2 to the 9th power, which I believe is 256. I might be wrong on that.
I don't do public math.
Yeah, I'm with you. So 2 to the, oh gosh, how do I use the calculator on this thing? 2 to the 9th, 512. So 512 nodes is obviously a huge cluster. So not everybody will want to allocate a /14. So maybe they cut that down. And then, as is prone to happen, oops, my application is wildly successful, right? We invented the next competitor to not the service formerly known as Twitter. I need to suddenly go from 256 to, 1,000 nodes in my cluster. So before, you were out of luck, right? All you could do is deploy a new cluster and migrate workload or balance across multiple clusters. So now it's pretty easy, straightforward, right? You go in, you do an OC patch, and it changes it. And you can now expand that out to be larger. So I find that to be really cool and very helpful. I don't think, can we change the prefix? I thought I saw somewhere that the prefix couldn't change. It was the CIDR size that or the cluster network.CIDR, not the cluster network.host prefix, but maybe I misread that somewhere.
Well, that makes sense, though, right? Because you're still locking the same number of pods in.
Yeah.
Right. You're still setting your max, right? And then you're just changing the IP space that they can utilize.
Yeah. So, anyways, I thought that was an interesting one. It's a good one.
Sorry.
No, you're good. And folks have been asking us about that for years, so I'm glad that we added that. Yeah. Go ahead, Jonny.
No, I was just gonna say, like when I was looking through the what's new, I was like, man, finally, this is awesome.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Overly aggressive IP space management happens sometimes, and I think it's also useful because if you add or if you end up using Submariner, so I have multiple clusters deployed. I didn't realize it at the time, but I need Submariner now for inter-cluster communication. they're not supposed to overlap. So now we have some ability to change those and modify them, so that way we can, we don't have to completely redeploy things.
And honestly, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, like it makes sense that you should be able to make not necessarily a minor change, but a change like that, right? That's if I had a Linux machine, I could go and make that same change, and it's not the end of the world, right? I can just go, as long as I have my IPs right, I can go and do my thing and then update it, and I don't necessarily have to reboot it, but I can.
Yeah, I will. So the last thing that I'll poke out or reiterate is pay attention to the rel 9.2 change with OpenShift 4.13. New kernel, new HCL. I was told, but I have not verified, that the rel 9 hardware list is basically the same as the rel 8 hardware list. But remember, the hardware vendors self-certify all of that. So just check and verify, if you need to, that your hardware continues to be supported. If you think it's, on the cusp of being, too old and your hardware vendor hasn't updated that or anything like that, that can be a potential gotcha.
Yeah, that's the most terrible day if you fall off that list.
Yeah, been there, done that. All right, what you got, Jonny?
So I'm just gonna go over multi-arch just really quick. Just it's really more of a recap from when we had the guys on a month and a half ago. I can't remember anymore, but like when they came on and they were talking about it, and and I'm also going to talk about HyperShift. And so I've been kicking the tires with HyperShift for the last few weeks and or last couple months, I guess. And it's an awesome project. It's tech preview right now, but it should be going GA hopefully. I don't know when it's going to go GA, but it should hopefully go GA. But we've been kicking it around and kind of putting it through its paces with our team, and it's pretty awesome. And so I know that Adele has come on a couple times, and we've had some technical issues with the demo. So I was just going to walk through, like, hey, if I want to use multi-arch support, how do I do it? First of all, like, what do I need? Because in my infinite wisdom, I was like, oh, same. OpenShift install, it'll OpenShift install. I'll just tell it that it goes and does ARM, and it's not. So you actually have to go and get the ARM client and then do everything that way. So let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen here.
So Suresh, does OpenShift support VMware Cloud Director? So it does not. If that's something you're interested in, I know that they've been tracking interest, so you can reach out to me or Jonny. So where's my little thing here? So you can reach out to me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. You're going to want to make that bigger, Jonny, or your window smaller.
Yep.
So andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. Just send me an email with, basically your use case, hey, all that type of stuff. I'll make sure that the product management team gets that, or reach out through, even better is to reach out through your account team and ask them to contact me. So that way they can associate, information and all that stuff with it. You can also reach out to Jonny. So Jonny, JONNY @redhat.com. And either one of us will handle that.
Yep. And just know, like, if there's a delay in me replying back to you, it's because I'm terrible with email right now. Like, I'm actually like noticeably terrible with replying.
How dare you?
It's awful right now. I'm trying to get caught up, man, but I hate email. So I'll just take a look at the install config right now. And it's pretty much everything that you would expect to be in an install config, except for my pull secret and my SSH key, which I normally put in there. So you see that we have our architecture set to ARM64 on both the control plane and the worker nodes. The M6GD and I believe I can't remember the other version, but in the documentation we list out the versions of, or the ARM machine types that we've tested against. And so I just took the general purpose machine type. Give your cluster a name. Every cluster deserves a name. And then, as you see, though, it's basic, right? Like, there's nothing here that's any different other than you're saying, instead of AMD 64, you're calling out ARM 64. I did try Arch, so AARCH 64, and that did not work for me. So just so you know, like, ARM 64 did work with these machine types for AWS. And then with that, if you go to mirror.openshift.com/pub v4 and then multi, and then clients, and then OCP. And now under here, you'll find the clients that you need to either do an OpenShift install and multi-arch support, or the OC binary to do multi-arch support. And this is important because, oh, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was going to let you finish your thought.
It's important because when you're deploying, say if you wanted to use a ARM-based hosted control plane, you have to deploy the control plane as an ARM cluster, and then you can have x86 clusters based off of that. So not overly difficult, but just so you know that there is some massaging that you're going to have to do.
I just wanted to ask, so it's the multi-arch client, which means that you are installing a cluster that can utilize multiple architectures, not you're running the client on a specific architecture.
Correct.
Because you're still, and it's, I can't read it, it's too small because my window is smaller than the normal stream window because it's, how our interface is here.
Yep.
But like you're still going to download the multi-arch client for x86 or for ARM or whatever it happens to be. The multi-arch in this instance means I am deploying a cluster of type multi-arch.
Yeah. And the reason why I bring this up, and like I said, I just assumed, right? All I do is update the install config and I run my OpenShift install because I'm telling it, hey, go deploy this in the cloud, right? I want this configuration in the cloud, but it enables some ARM-based features within the OpenShift install binary, and it utilizes some of those APIs, I guess. And that's, you have to do it this way. So just so you don't hit the wall and try and figure out like, what am I doing wrong when this all looks like it should be working? You do need the multi-arch OpenShift install to deploy an ARM-based cluster from your like Mac or Linux machine or whatever. And then that is right here. So I have a HyperShift cluster that's up. So instead of deploying a new one, I'm just gonna keep fat fingering what I'm doing here. So if I do OC who, just kidding. All right.
You got to turn on tab completion.
I know, dude. Yes. So we can see when we actually, let me do this. I'm sorry for jumping around. Let's see. So when we deploy HyperShift, all we have to deploy is the multi-cluster engine. And so you go into Operator Hub. Stop being silly, Johnny.
Can you hear the dog having a dream?
I was gonna say, can you hear my dog snoring? Like she's going after it.
I hear her like yipping, and I can see her twitching.
All right, let's see here. Install operators. Yeah, so when we install HyperShift, we just need to deploy the multi-cluster engine, and then what that'll do is that'll configure like just the operator or the operator group and the subscription, and then we actually deploy an engine resource, and this is where we turn on these tech preview features. So we have the HyperShift preview, and we set that to true. And once this goes GA, we shouldn't have to do this. This will probably be on by default. And then the other one, it's the managed service account preview. I set that to true. I was like, oh man, that sounds kind of cool. So like, I haven't used it yet, so I need to go back and do that. But it's pretty awesome.
And to be clear, like most of the time when we show hosted control planes, we show it with ACM. Yeah. And ACM adds the GUI aspect, it adds the cluster management aspect, but it doesn't do the actual cluster deployment. ACM hasn't done the cluster deployment part in a long time. MCE has always been the thing behind the scenes doing that. And who we talked about that on the stream. It's been a few episodes ago. Because MCE uses Hive, it uses something else that is escaping me at the moment, and it uses Cluster API now with hosted control planes, because hosted control planes uses Cluster API. So yeah, if you're just using, like Johnny's showing here, if you're going to deploy new clusters and you're comfortable using, YAML, either at the CLI or by just going in and manually creating the resources in the admin console, you don't need ACM to use hosted control planes.
Right. Right. And so if you look actually at the interface, right? So this is our OpenShift console. Now, if you've used ACM, right, then you know that this should look familiar to you, right? So you can go and look at all of your clusters. In version 2.8 of ACM, the clusters do not get automatically imported. So as you create a cluster through HyperShift, the clusters will be present within the engine UI, but they don't get automatically imported. So if I wanted to import these, then I would go in and I could manually import them, or through automation, I could create the clusterlet and all the stuff that it needs for it to be pulled in. And some of it, so just so you know, out of like, yeah, I guess more just for informational purposes, if I were not to pull in this cluster, if I did not import it, then I'm losing all of the goodness that comes with ACM, right? All of the governance goodness, all of the management goodness, all the bells and whistles that we really like ACM for. I don't get to take advantage of that. Is my cluster still operational? Absolutely. Can I still deploy workloads to it? 100%. And so I think that that's something that it's important to note that if you don't need all that integration, like you're just spinning something up to tear it down right away, maybe you don't need to work on the import. But if you do want to have some of that goodness and you want to deploy these into a production-esque, like this is going to be your staging for team A, then yeah, maybe you do want to work on that automation for import. And also know that in 2.9, the automatic import is supposed to be a part of it with overrides to say otherwise, right? So you'll be able to override and say, no, don't worry about this one. And then just showing like, hey, we've got node pools. Node pools are the machine sets, if you will, for the hosted control plane. So if we go look, and I know I'm jumping around. I'm sorry, I do this all the time. I just want to go back to the multi-cluster engine just to point something out. Go to operators, operator hub.
It's a microcosm of your world, Jonny.
It is, and on top of that, like I can't stay focused on one thing for more than like 2. I'm like a goldfish, so. Yeah, so we can see that we have our target namespace. So this is where all the HyperShift stuff is getting deployed, right? So by default, we're saying, hey, go put everything for HyperShift, for multi-cluster engine, and the multi-cluster engine namespace. Then when we create a cluster, a managed cluster or a hosted cluster, right? It creates a namespace called clusters dash. Now you can override that. Like the default is just clusters. And so you would, yep, thanks, Adele. So if you run if you're looking for your cluster, it's basically like, hey, OC get pods -n clusters dash your cluster name. And so what it does is it isolates your control plane into a namespace. And then that way, if I have multiple clusters like we do, I keep thinking I have to hit tab here. Hosted clusters. Right, I can see that I have the Hoff, I have Lester's, and then I have my cluster here, right? But you can see that they're all in the clusters, like top scope.
So hosted clusters is the custom resource object that says create me a new cluster, and named whatever you just HCP pattern, whatever you called it.
Yep.
And then the operator will create a new namespace named clusters dash whatever the cluster name was, and that's where the control plane workload for that hosted control plane cluster resides.
Yep, exactly.
And then I don't remember, where does it keep the node pool objects at?
That's in clusters.
It is in clusters? Okay.
Yeah. Let's get node pools. I believe it's in clusters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And again, so node pools are akin to machine sets in regular OpenShift, right? So if I do an OC scale replicas for node pool, don't be stupid. Just don't embarrass yourself in front of everybody. Right? I can scale it up and down. Now, something to keep in mind, if you're trying to do cost savings, right? Like say you're reusing this cluster through the week and you want to shut things down at night. What we found, and it's even in the HyperShift documentation, where you can destroy a node pool, but that has it's destructive, right? Because you're literally tearing down the nodes, right? So they're getting terminated in AWS, like it's killing them. But your hosted cluster stays up, your hosted control plane stays alive. So what we do is we have a Lambda job, or Lambda function rather, and it goes out at, like, I think it's 8 p.m. Central or something like that, and it says, hey, if you're not the management cluster, shut down. And then that way you can have your cluster back in the morning and stuff like that, and pick up where you left off. So there are some things that you need to work out, but the install it's super easy, right? You need to set up an S3 bucket. You need to set up the S3 bucket with a policy, and then you'll need AWS credentials and your pool secret, and then you can, create your cluster, create the multi-cluster engine, or apply the multi-cluster engine subscription and operator group, and then the MCE, and you're basically all set. There's a HyperShift install that you run that adds some additional CRDs, but it's that easy. I mean, it's super easy.
Yeah, it's and it takes almost no time for clusters to deploy, which is nice.
Yeah, it takes about 10 minutes. We have our core cluster in, I think, East 2, and then we deploy our work clusters in like West 1. And even with that, it's like a 11-minute gap, or 11-minute time to spin up.
Yep. Yeah, and I know I see Adele in chat. I know he's come on the stream before and talked about HyperShift, or hosted control planes rather.
Yep.
So yeah, it's really, I don't know. I'm super excited about hosted control planes, especially once the on-prem providers are available. Like it's really cool with AWS and with the others, but the on-prem ones I think are going to be really cool for labs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I saw.
One thing, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Well, I saw one of the use cases, and along with some automation. I think like clusters on demand, clusters as a service for developers and developer teams. Imagine if we could help, developer inner loop activities by, hey, I bring up my VS Code, I click the button, or more likely it's a keyboard shortcut, right? I do the thing, and now I have a whole running cluster, and I connect into that, and now when I do my build, everything gets deployed directly into my specific dedicated OpenShift cluster. And I'm an admin in there, so if I need to deploy an operator for my application or whatever, just getting the infrastructure out of the way as much as possible.
Yeah. That's an awesome project, by the way. Cluster, that is a ridiculously awesome project.
So
Cluster as a service.
I'm looking forward to seeing, and I don't remember the GitHub repo for that off the top of my head, but I know we can dig it up and share it. But yeah, that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, the other thing I really like about this, I'm like super high on HyperShift. I really am. Like, I think it's just the amount of efficiency that we've built in. We're in like a penny pinching part of our technical lives right now, right? Like professional everything, right? And
isn't everyone?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I mean.
I feel like the whole economy has been preparing for something to happen at any time, and nothing's happened yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, and like I know that like our team, we were probably applying a good chunk of AWS cloud cred out there, right? Like we were pulling it in pretty good, and this has cut our costs down like insane. So, I think if you're looking at a way to save money, or at least to cut back on some of your cloud spend, like this is an awesome resource. The other cool thing is that if you've ever deleted your state information, like when you do the OpenShift install, it gives you all your Terraform state and all that. If you've ever accidentally deleted that or moved to a different laptop like I do and can't remember where it was, then you have to go in there. You have to go into AWS and try and find all the resources and then delete them, and then hope that you deleted them in the right order, because it's just a giant pain in the butt. There's a HyperShift destroy command that has a destroy cloud resources, and all you do is you throw the region and the infra ID at it, and it goes out and it shoots it right in the head and it kills it. It's so awesome. Like it is. Oh, yeah. That's one of those ones where I want to submit an issue in Jira and just thank them for that, because that was awesome.
No, like I said, I'm also really excited about this. I know we're across Red Hat, there's a number of different initiatives to showcase different possibilities, different capabilities. One of the folks on my team is looking at how to do like a distributed tier out type of thing. So I've got, the central, if you will, hosted control plane cluster, and effectively you can deploy hosted control plane hosting clusters to individual regions, for example, US East, US West, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can deploy clusters from there. So I have one cluster that's in, just to keep things easy, central, that has clusters in East and West. And from there, I can deploy clusters in each of those respective regions and manage everything centrally. It's really interesting.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah. So, are y'all looking at doing like the compact cluster, or like single nodes in like the I don't know what you want to branches?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the level of the details. I just know the project.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
we did. Oh, sorry.
No, it could be either, right? I mean, ideally, the control plane hosting clusters are going to be larger than that in order to accommodate the workload. But yeah.
Yeah, we kind of started there. I was like, man, should we start big? But the cool thing about deploying the compact cluster in AWS is that we get the control plane machine set, right? So if I have to scale it up, like I can just, let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Control plane machine set? Question mark.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Oh, I mean, if you spell it right, I guess. Controllably? Forgot not?
Clearly, it's a Wednesday after a long weekend.
Dude, I'm being silly now. But yeah, so like, I right now I have our machines as 2XL, and so that way if it starts to get where we're just like smashing this thing with more clusters, it's super simple for me to scale this back up to or scale this up to a size that is more accommodating for what the team needs without having to do a like we were talking about before, 4XL or 8XL burn in. We're getting like maybe 8% of that. You know what I mean? So.
Yep. Yeah. Adele is the authority on this, so pay attention. Anything he says in chat is far more authoritative than anything Jonny or I will say.
Yeah.
Yeah. OpenShift validated patterns coming up. I don't know anything about that, Jonny. What?
Well,
let me toss you under that bus.
Shameless plug. Yeah, so we are actually, I am working on a HyperShift validated pattern right now. I'm going through some of the testing phases, and the idea is basically just give you a button to push that gets HyperShift deployed. But that's it, right? It's not going to go and deploy a cluster for you. You're going to have to pick up the task from that point. But basically, just get everything ready for you. So it'll deploy HyperShift. It'll have the MC and everything ready, and then you just go out and you say, hey, you run the HyperShift CLI to deploy your stuff. That's the goal.
Yeah, and Waleed, I see your previous statement there about how to provision with pre-configured operators, dev spaces, GitOps, stuff like that. Definitely look at that hosted cluster, CRD, because there's a bunch of stuff that you can manage directly from that resource. So, for example, you can, as a part of the cluster specification, provide an authentication provider out of the box, and it's controlled from the MCE side of things. It's controlled by that admin and applied against that cluster. So there's a bunch of stuff that's happening inside of there. I don't know. I would assume it's possible, but I have not verified or checked. I would assume you can control things like composable OpenShift. So if you don't want to deploy the console, for example, you can turn that off as a part of that custom resource, the hosted cluster custom resource, stuff like that. But I think the point here, like with pre-configured operators, dev spaces, GitOps, etc., I kind of feel like that's where ACM comes into play, right? So, if I deploy the cluster and I have a tag, or a label associated with it in ACM, as soon as it joins, then we can push that configuration out to it. So ACM is definitely helpful in that respect.
Oh, and yeah, I just saw this, so I'm like, oh, duh, I should have said this. So when you want to deploy, say if you have an ARM management cluster, hosting cluster, and you want to deploy an x86, you can actually do this release image string, and what it will do, Babuni, they are HyperShift and HTTP are the same. Hosted control planes is the official name, and then HyperShift is upstream.
HyperShift is the project. Hosted control planes is the product.
Yeah. Yeah, that's way better.
Or feature, as the case may be. Adele probably just cringed when I said product, but feature.
So yeah, so if you look here with this release image, this is where we tell HyperShift, like, hey, go, I want to deploy a 4.12 or a 4.11, or, I don't think it'll do 4.10. It might, or 4.13, right? It'll use the latest and it'll try to fit it.
4.10 goes out of support, I think, tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Or Friday. So 4.10 is probably a bad idea.
Yeah, so don't do that. But you see, like, if we wanted, it gives you a lot of flexibility. And if you had that ARM-based hosting cluster and you wanted to deploy an x86 cluster, right, you would have this image here. You would use, a specific release image, so that way it knows to go and pull the right one and deploy the cluster with it. And then I was just going to see if I could actually throw any like operator lists at it. It doesn't look like it.
September 10th. So Sunday is the last day of support for 4.10.
Nice. Yes. It's over.
So 4.10 is the last EUS version with 18 months of support. So with 4.12 EUS, it's now 24 months, 2 years of EUS support. So 4.12 will be supported all the way out through January of 2025.
Wow.
Yeah.
Think about how different OpenShift is going to look in 2025 compared to right now.
I mean, I don't know. I was having so funny technology conversations. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about, it's been barely 15 years since like the first smartphone was released. And, look at how far they've come. Look at what's changed, and it's been barely 30 years since the first, cell phones existed at all. So, my oldest, who is 15, imagine what it's going to look like when he's my age, from a technology standpoint. I'm going to be the old grumpy guy, that my kids are making fun of like, oh, Dad, why haven't you used your brain phone yet? Like,
you're still there trying to swipe.
Yeah. You're still using that old fashioned, poke at the screen phone, I think of my, parents and grandparents who still use flip phones. So actually that's not true. My parents have now moved to, smartphones, but
yeah, my mom used to use the Note. She could take a little pen out.
Yeah. So the pace of technology is terrifying. Assuming global warming doesn't.
Dude, one more summer like this, man.
Yeah, Peter, magnetic tape and mainframes, they will never die. Along with virtual machines. Virtual machines are here to stay forever. Virtual machines are, and somebody out there will violently disagree with this statement, but virtual machines are the new mainframe, right? They're not going anywhere. Too much business logic. We've spent the last 20 years importing all of business into virtual machines, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with that.
No matter how much we like containers or whatever comes next. I was talking with Ortwin yesterday about WASM.
WASM, yeah.
That's like, we're still, that's still a thing. Like we're still talking about that. I haven't heard about that in a little while, but it was supposed to be the future of the internet. Remember?
Yeah. It's making a comeback though, kind of.
Is it? I don't know.
Kind of. I mean, it's getting. I don't know if it's getting more popular, but I've heard more about it recently than I have in previous years. So
yeah, I mean, I can spell developer, DEV dot, but that's about all I know about it. So
that's right. I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
Yeah, it says the guy who works in engineering.
I'm more like the Lego guy though, right? Like I just put Legos together.
Yeah. Well, yeah, isn't that GitOps, right? GitOps is putting Legos together, just YAML shaped Legos.
That's right. Painfully shaped YAML objects.
All right. Well, we should probably close up before we diverge too far. Plus, I got to eat some lunch before a staff meeting because such is life.
Yeah.
So for our audience, if you are watching us live, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit those in the chat. We'll do our best to get to those before we close out. I know occasionally, because we run a little bit ahead of folks, we'll get questions like as we're clicking the button to end the stream. So we try to give you all good warning for that. If you are not watching us live, again, feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me at Practical Andrew on all of the various social media platforms. As soon as I find my click thing here again, do note that I am, I would say, very infrequently on X/Twitter anymore. So I do maybe every 2 to 3 weeks I'll log in just to look at it. But Reddit and several of the others are kind of LinkedIn, especially, is kind of where I've been spending a lot of time these days. So the OpenShift subreddit is a pretty good one, right? There's pretty good participation there. There's lots of folks that go on. Jonny usually posts the streams there, stuff like that. Or you can always email me, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. That's usually the fastest way to get a hold of me because I don't ignore email like Jonny does. You can reach Jonny at JRockTX1, also across all the various social media platforms, or Jonny, Jonny, at redhat.com. And of course, I will also make a plug for the OpenShift users Slack channel. I find that one is a great one. I keep it up all day long. I'm logged into the Red Hat Slack and I'm logged into the Kubernetes Slack. So it's a great way to get a hold of us and ask questions, along with there's a ton of other people both in Red Hat and in the community that all participate there. So, and my apologies, I don't remember who asked earlier. All of the various CNCF projects more or less have rooms, have channels inside of that Kubernetes team. So you can always find folks involved there. And if the project has its own Slack channel or Slack team, they'll direct you to the right place. And then Commons, I always make a plug for Commons because they are our specific OpenShift community. So be sure to check them out. I know somebody was saying for a while that there was an issue or something. Thank you, Waleed. It's always fun to me to get emails from the artist formerly known as Twitter, because it's like new email from X and then in parentheses formerly Twitter. Like it's still.
Yeah.
I don't think the name of it is actually X. I think the name of it is actually X formerly Twitter.
Oh, that'd be funny.
Could you please share the Red Hat docs for configuring hosted control planes?
I'm on it right now.
Okay.
On it right now. Yep.
But so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. If anything comes up, either during or after the stream, we would love to hear from you, and that is a great way to get in touch with us. I always suggest that folks subscribe to the various channels. Do note, however, if you are on YouTube, that kind of anything that we post to the various YouTube channels will come through that subscription.
I think Andrew dropped.
I don't know what happened there. I didn't.
That was weird.
I didn't drop. It just it took me off and then popped up a thing saying something happened. So I don't know. Something blipped.
You're done.
Yeah.
You're done.
Restream just told me to shut my mouth and go eat lunch. Well, that was fun. Anyways. So subscribe if you so choose. Me personally, I set up we use Google services here at Red Hat, so I have a filter so that I filter out a lot of the noise. It only allows the certain ones that meet the subject template, to land in my inbox. So maybe a little tip there. And with all of that, thank you, everyone. We will see you next week where we'll be talking Ansible and dev spaces. So being able to manage not just OpenShift with Ansible, but kind of anything and everything Ansible, because it's AAP. And any last thoughts, Jonny? I will leave it with you while I figure out which button to click next.
Thanks for all the questions and interaction. If you have anything, say if you're not going to make it next week, shoot Andrew and I a message. Let us know what you want us to ask, what you want us to talk about, and if it's, if it's on topic, then we'll definitely ask it, or we'll at least ask the guests, or we'll give our opinion on it. Yeah, so just reach out and let us know what you want to talk about, or let us know if you have any questions, and we'll get back to you. But no, good stream, Andrew. Good to see you again.
I know it feels like it's been a minute.
It feels like it does, yeah.